SiteGrinder templates are pretty amazing, and it's because they're not just Photoshop files. They are Photoshop files with layers that already have the proper hinting to allow you to take advantage of a myriad of SiteGrinder features, including column-based layout, galleries, forms, and much more. To show you how they're used, we're going to take a particular template, go ahead and download it, open it up in Photoshop file, and kind of go through the process a little bit. So before we do anything, let's take a look at the end result, and then we'll see how we actually get to that end result. What we'll do is we'll scroll down the Media Lab website page for templates here, and we will find the one we're going to be working with, which is called Big Real Estate. Now, if your company is named Big Real Estate already, you're in luck, but if not, it's easy to customize these things. So we'll go down to the View Live Site link here. All the templates have pre-deployed sort of finished versions that you can take a look at as an example of what a finished version would look like when you're finished with it. All right, here we are at the site itself, and your template will look almost exactly like this, but some of the content will be generic. So, for example, when you see this big mountainous photograph here, that'll be just a solid color layer in Photoshop, and you're meant to replace that with your own photography, either something that you'll do either in Photoshop directly in the layer itself, or you'll do in the Content Manager later by swapping in your own image. Other features of this page include a menu here at the top, and notice that one of the menu items actually has a pre-built animated pop-down menu. And one of the things you can do, of course, to customize this is in the Design Manager, you could change that animation effect to be, let's say, crossfade instead of sliding on. Another thing you'll notice about this page is that we have a bunch of menus already set up over here on the left-hand side, and you can add menu items either in Photoshop or even better in the Content Manager using the little menu editor. You can add your own menu items and change the menu items that are there, change the links, all of those things that you normally do in SiteGrinder. But what's really convenient about the template is it's already set up so that if you add more menu items to one of these menus, the colored area in the background of the menu will actually grow appropriately to fit the new menu items. Of course, on a larger scale, the footer here will move to accommodate the whole set of menus here. So it's really pretty amazing how flexible these designs are. And then, of course, you have the inevitable lorem ipsum text here in the content area that you can also edit either in Photoshop or in the Content Manager. Let's look at a couple of other pages that are part of this template so you can get an idea of the power that it makes available to you. Here's a Contact Us form. It's already pretty much set up to work. All you need to do is provide your email address, which we'll talk about how to do in a minute. That's something that you do. If you've used a form in SiteGrinder before, you'll know that you do that in the Forms panel that comes up when you open SiteGrinder from Photoshop. This form is also customizable both in appearance, in terms of the color of the labels and things like that, and also in function. You can actually add new fields in Photoshop if you need to the type layer, but this gives you a really good start for what a common Contact Us form actually contains. Let's look at one other page here, and that's the Locations page. The reason this page is interesting is because it has a functioning SiteGrinder gallery on it. And these, of course, are just the sample photos used by the person who put together this particular example version of the site. You'll use your own photos, and you can manage them in SiteGrinder's Content Manager. And in the Design Manager, you can actually change how the thumbnails are laid out, change the size of the picture box. Maybe you don't like this little cornery thing that appears on top of the photos. You can get rid of that or modify it to your own ends. So that's kind of the joy of SiteGrinder galleries without any of the annoyance of having to actually set them up as layers in Photoshop. Not that that's annoying, but you might want to just kind of jump straight to the actual built gallery and not have to worry about hinting and layers and all of that. And that's really what the template is for. And notice on this page, even though the content is a different height than the previous page, the footer has moved down to accommodate it. All right, so we can see we're going to get a pretty powerful, good-looking site out of this template. Let's go ahead and go all the way back to the beginning of how we approach using templates. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch to the Finder, and I'm going to just start with the downloaded zip file that you'll get when you buy a template. The first thing we'll do is double-click it. And what that's going to do is create a folder. And inside this folder, we'll find three things. The first is the actual PSD file itself. The second thing is a JPEG, which is really just a preview. It's kind of like the serving suggestion on a can of beans or something. You can delete it. It's not necessary to the template. And then another thing that's not strictly necessary but is really great is this folder here, which contains pre-built versions of the pages. Now, I don't mean pre-deployed. These are not ready to upload. These are pre-built for the design manager, and they already have settings that are the kinds of settings that you make in the design manager already set up to be attractive within this particular template. So, for example, the appearance changes that menus go through when you roll over them, that sort of thing. They're in this folder. Now, you don't have to worry about doing anything with these files, because once we open SiteGrinder, after we open this Photoshop file, it will notice that there's this folder here that matches the name of the Photoshop file, and it'll do what's necessary. And what it'll do, not that you need to know this, is it'll copy the contents of this folder to the SiteGrinder data folder in the right place, so that SiteGrinder will recognize these as settings that are connected to the PSD. And speaking of the PSD, I'm just going to double click it, and we'll just open it right up in Photoshop. Now, notice that we actually have a number of layer comps already set up. And this, again, is one of the great things about SiteGrinder templates, is you have multiple page designs within a single Photoshop document. So we can quickly just kind of go through these, and you'll see that there's the contact page, for example, that we were looking at in the built version of the site. And this is where you would take your type tool and come in here and type additional fields if you want to. We can look at the page that had the gallery on it, and you see that we have these various layers that make up the gallery. And here's a little hint. Since you didn't make the Photoshop document, you might want a quick way to kind of get to the layers. And I find the easiest way is to use the Move tool and turn it to auto select mode. So that way, when you click on these layers, it'll automatically select them for you. So it's easy to find the menu layer or the logo layer, that kind of thing. Let's actually take a look at the layers. We can see the other way to find them. The other way to locate layers here is just to go through the hierarchical folder setup, because the templates are set up very logically so that you can find the different parts of the page quite easily. So, for example, we have a layer group here, or layer folder, that represents the left panel, and it has the different menus there. We have the right panel. We have the navigation area, the logo, all of these sorts of things. And that's basically how it's organized. You'll notice that the index folder here has this stuff that goes on the home page. So let's switch over to the home page here. And we'll see that we have the text contents that we can modify either here, or we can modify it in the content manager after we deploy the site. So that's kind of how you find stuff in here to manipulate. And let's take, for example, just this placeholder image that's in the background here. Remember, this was that big mountain photo on the final version of the site. Well, I can actually replace that photo right here in Photoshop just by pasting in the contents of a different photo into this layer. Or I can choose, because this layer has the content hint on it, I can actually replace this image in the content manager down the road after we've built and deployed. It's really just up to you. If it's going to be the same image and never change, you might as well put it in Photoshop. But if you think you might change that image later, do it with the content hint and import it into the content manager, and then you or even your client can change it later using the content manager. All right, let's actually open up SiteGrinder now and see what we get. So what I'm going to do here is save the Photoshop file, and I'm going to open up SiteGrinder, of course, from the Automate menu. And when I do this, basically SiteGrinder notices that folder of settings, copies it one time to the SiteGrinder data folder, and then it's going to basically have found the designs, as it were, for this file. So that means I can go to the Build and Deploy panel. Notice that the little build checkboxes are off because SiteGrinder knows these pages are already built, and we can find them by simply clicking this View Built Designs button. When I click it, it's going to open SiteGrinder's Design Manager in my default browser, in this case Safari, and we're going to have the list of pages that SiteGrinder found from those layer comps. So I'll go ahead and click on, for example, the home page, and here we see a number of options opening up over on the left-hand side of the Design Manager. If we want, we can change the animation effect of that drop-down menu, or we can change the styles. Notice that when I roll over the menu items, they underline. Maybe we want a different style. We want them to change in color, for example, possibly, or maybe we want them to become bold or get a drop shadow or something like that. That's all settable using the text button and menu styles, and the border and background styles as well. We can give a background color to this text area here, and borders, drop shadows, things like that. Other very powerful things you can do in the Design Manager include gallery settings. So for example, I can switch to my locations page, which had a gallery on it, and I can change this picture box from being sort of the plain Jane CSS that it is now into a tricked out Flash player with wild animations and music playing in the background. I can change these thumbnails, the way they work, to be animated Flash also, or any of the other kind of SiteGrinder thumbnail types that we have available. And again, border and background styles, the usual stuff. And here's our form. You'll notice opening up over here on the left, we'll get our form appearance panel, and that's going to allow us to change the background color of the fields, the color of the labels, things like that. So all of this is the kind of thing that you do in the Design Manager. Let's switch on back to Photoshop real quick and talk about the things that we do in the SiteGrinder window. So in the SiteGrinder window, we can set up for our custom site things like our form settings by going to the Forms panel, and I can just click on this little link next to the form that SiteGrinder found. And you'll notice that the recipient is set to just some generic, meaningless email address. You'll want to put your own or your client's email address wherever you want the data from the form sent in that field. And at that point, you're pretty much done, although you can optionally add a subject for the email, the sender's name. You can put a sender name such as, my email form or something like that. And then the sender email address could be, myform@mymail.com, whatever you want the sender address to be. The compression panel will allow you to customize the compression settings. Now notice the designer of this form has already customized a number of these layers for us to use PNG24 because those particular layers are semi-transparent. If you need to make any other modifications to the settings, if you're finding that if you add a photo, for example, and you want to change it to JPEG, this is where you do that, of course. And finally, if you want to change settings like the description text for your pages, the meta keywords, if you need to add any special JavaScript or other stuff to your the head of your document, you can do that kind of thing with the SiteGrinder settings panel. When you make these kinds of changes, you will need to rebuild using the Build and Deploy panel, clicking the Build button here. But you won't lose the settings that the designer made unless you've replaced them with others. You'll still retain the settings that you or the designer have made in the Design Manager when you rebuild. And when you're ready to actually upload your site or manage your site prior to uploading it, you'll want to deploy the site, which means you will create a new site using the Sites menu, New Site button, and you will choose your content manager settings, your e-commerce settings, if any are applied for the site, and then you'll build and you'll open up the pages in the content manager, and you'll be ready to manage your site or have your client manage your site. So that's basically the shape of how you use a SiteGrinder template. And if you have any questions, please go to MediaLab.com and ask our tech support people or on the forums, and we'll be happy to help you with them.